How's it going, YouTube? This is Alex Hicks, and welcome to part 5 of our networking series, Unity with Node.js multiplayer. Today we're going to be working on some shooting, and then in our future tutorials we're going to be cleaning up shooting and doing collision detection. So, first thing we're going to get started is we're inside Unity, and we need a bullet. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into 2D Object and Sprite here. And we're going to create a new sprite, and we're going to choose, because our tank is red, we're going to choose the bullet red 1 underscore outline. Cool. And we'll change this to player and 5. So that means they'll be sitting above the tank, which is okay for itself. The last thing we need to do is, because it's controlled over the network, is we're going to be adding a network identity to it, and I just like to have it dragged up above. Beautiful. Okay, so if you guys, I'm just going to save there, and I'm going to name this bullet. Save the scene, and we're going to drag this and create a prefab inside of prefabs folder. And we can delete this guy now. Okay, we're going to drag our tank player in, and we're going to open him up. And we're going to create a bullet spawn point. So if you just right click on barrel here, create empty. We're going to call this bullet spawn point. What we're doing is we're just giving the tank somewhere to spawn the bullet. So, for example, we want this moved down in front, and I'm actually going to move this to -2.5. I found was a good example. Now, because our tank is facing a certain direction, we're going to be using this green arrow is the direction the bullet has to travel. So in order to do that, we need to rotate it 180 degrees on the z-axis. Okay, and if I just grab z-axis and I move, you can see how it rotates, right? And we just want it facing our current barrel. So we're going to set that to 180. And then we have to, if you want to left click on the prefab and you want to hit apply. And that's going to apply this guy to the prefab, so now the next time we start, we'll have that all ready to go. Okay, so we are just gonna do, as long as it's saved and it's blue, you can left click here and you can hit delete, and we're gonna hit save. Okay, so we're gonna go into our player manager class, and we're gonna start doing some shooting code. So if we open up player manager here, I'm just going to get rid of some of the stuff from the last tutorial. We're going to add a few things. So the first thing we're going to add is the bullet spawn point, right? So we just created that now, so we're going to grab reference to it. We're going to call this bullet spawn point. Okay, beautiful. We're going to go down here, and we're going to be initializing some stuff later on, so we're going to add in the start function. And I can't apparently type. There we go. And last thing we're going to do is we're going to add in check shooting. And we don't have that function quite yet, and that's why it's red. And we're going to scroll down to the bottom, and we're going to create that function called check shooting. Keeping it very simple, just like how we had it through all this whole series. Okay, so before we start shooting, we're gonna create a utility script for cooldown, because basically, if you're pressing on the left mouse, you will want the bullet to fire every X seconds. Otherwise, you're gonna either force your client to just click as fast as they can, or they're going to have to click, and then they're going to have to click again, and you're going to have a timer in this class, and it gets messy. And so basically, we're going to make a timer class. We're going to call it cooldown. So if we come back to our folder here, we are going to go into utility. You're going to left click on utility here after it finishes compiling. We're going to go into code and create new C# script. And I have my own just templates there, so if you don't see exactly that, just create a new script and follow along, just like you have before. Okay, so we're going to call this one cooldown. And just like I said, this could be used for anything. You can use this in action RPG for skills and just anything you really need a timer for that kind of keeps it encapsulated and nice. So it's a very handy utility script to have. Okay, cool. So we're going to add this to the utility namespace. And it doesn't need to be attached to anything. So we're going to get rid of the mono behavior to it, which will get rid of these functions. Beautiful. And so just like any timer, we're going to go through, we're going to add a length or how long the timer is. We're going to have a counter for the current time. And then we're also going to have a Boolean value on if this is in cooldown. So if it's on cooldown, then we'll be able to return that. Since we're not inheriting from mono behavior, we can do standard C# class-based structure where we have a constructor. So we're going to say public cooldown. We're going to say float. We're going to say length. It's going to be equal to 1. So this is just an optional parameter. You don't have to do that. We're going to say bool, and we're going to say start with cooldown. So if you had a skill, for example, and you wanted them when they start the game that they go on cooldown so they can't just spam right after the start, this is a good way to do it. So we'll just say current time is equal to 0. Length will be equal to length. And if they don't pass in the length parameter, it's going to be equal to 1. And then we're going to say on cooldown is going to be equal to start with cooldown. Beautiful. So the one downside about not having as a mono behavior is that you kind of have to have your own cooldown update. So we're going to say cooldown update. And then we're going to say if cooldown. And then we're just like any other time, we're going to say current time. We're going to plus equals to time.delta time. We're going to go in, we're going to write an if statement. We're going to say current time is greater than or equal to length. And if it is, we're going to reset the current time back to 0. And we're going to say that it is now off cooldown. Okay, cool. And make sure you put a void there. Alright, so then some utility handled stuff. So we're going to have to ask this class if we're on cooldown. So is on cooldown. And you can just return whether or not it's on cooldown. And one other one is to actually start the cooldown. So if you activate your skill shot, then this has to go on cooldown. So we have to let the class know that it's on cooldown. So we're going to say start cooldown. And then we're going to say it's on cooldown. And then we're going to set the current time back to 0 just in case. Okay, cool. So that is our utility class. So now if you go back to the player manager here, we are going to add just a private variable. So we're going to have a couple in this tutorial. So I'm going to just make a little section called shooting. We're going to say private cooldown, and we don't have the namespace, so make sure you do control and then the period to bring in the namespace. And we're going to call this shooting cooldown. Beautiful. And the reason why we need to start was so we could initialize this. I tend not to initialize in the top here. You can, but I like all my initialization stuff in initialize function, a start, a wake, or that sort of stuff. So for now, we're just going to put as a cooldown for 1. And I could leave this blank, like I was saying before. It is optional and default to 1, but it's up to you whether you put the 1 or not. Okay. So we're going to go back down to the shooting. And we're going to say shooting cooldown, and this is when we're going to fire the cooldown updates. So this is going to happen basically if we have control per frame. We're just going to update the cooldown so it can do its timer. Then we're going to check if we pressed, and we're going to use the left mouse button. So we're going to say .get mouse button, and I'm not going to use the down or the up states. I'm going to just use the state. So what this will allow us to do is basically this will tell us if it's held or not. And then this will allow you to just hold down the left mouse button, and with the cooldown update, you'll be able to pump out bullets every second, which is what we have it to. Okay, so if they are pressing the left mouse button and our thing is not on cooldown, so is shooting cooldown dot is on cooldown, and then remember that the exclamation point is a not operator. Okay, so if it's not on cooldown, then the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to start the cooldown. So now we've fired a bullet, okay? So now this is valid that we've fired a bullet. We're going to start the cooldown. We're going to do a thing called define bullet, and we're going to make that class here in a second. And then we are going to send the bullet. Okay. So to define the bullet, like we did with position stuff before, we're going to create a class inside network client here, just to hold different bullet data. So we're going to make a serializable field, serializable class, my bad. And we're going to say public class. We're going to call this bullet data. And it's going to take in a public string. Call this ID, public, and we're just going to be using the positional data that's up here. In theory, you could call this vector2 data or something. Not vector2 because that class already exists, but you could call it like vector2 data. I'm going to keep it just called position. And this one is a position, and then it looks more weird when you say position and then direction. But basically, it's just an x and a y value. So that's why we're using it. No need to make one called direction with an x and a y when we already have that kind of data structure set up. Okay, so if you go back to Player Manager, we're going to scroll back up to shooting, and we are going to create a definition for the bullet. So we're going to say private bullet data. We're going to say this is bullet data, and then we're going to come down to the start. We're going to say bullet data equal to new bullet data. And just like before that we were talking about in earlier tutorials, the reason why I'm just doing this is to kind of cycle it and kind of keep that chunk of memory and not allowing the program to like get rid of that memory and then making a new one, and it just causes more. It doesn't cause more issues if you just kind of create it, but it will increase how much memory you're using because it has to create the memory, has to like allocate, create the memory, and then the garbage collection has to come pick up the old memory. So if I just kind of continue like recycling it, then it works a little bit better. Okay, so we're going to say bullet data dot position is equal to new position, and then bullet data dot direction is also equal to new position. Okay, so this will by default everything out. Okay, so if we scroll down to define bullet, we are going to say bullet data dot position dot x is equal to bullet spawn point dot position dot x, and then just like before with our utility function, we're going to say 2 decimals. And if you have so far not had the 2 decimals, make sure you go back and check out the last tutorial where I go over the method extensions for that. Okay, so I am just going to go copy this guy. I'm going to paste, and then I'm going to change it to y. And then we're going to do the directional stuff. So we're going to say bullet data dot direction dot x is equal to bullet spawn point dot up, so that green arrow that I was pointing into Unity, and then dot x. So by default, a transform gives you a couple different arrow directions. It'll give you things like forward and up and right, and then from there you can calculate left by doing negative right and down by negative down, negative up. And this will give you different directions. So no matter what, if you're rotating your transform inside Unity, it will give you the proper vector direction that up is facing, which is very, very handy. And it allows us to basically just do this one line of code without worrying about what the rotation data or the positional data currently is on the player. Okay, and then we're going to send the bullet. So sending the bullet, we have our network identity. We're going to get the socket. We're going to do an emit function, and we're going to call it fire bullet with the lowercase u. There you go, fire bullet. We're going to say new JSON object. And then we're just going to put that there. And inside the new JSON object, we're going to say JSON utility dot to JSON. And then inside there, we'll put in bullet data. Nothing new, just using the same techniques that we've used for positional and rotational data. Okay. So we're going to go to our network client, and we're going to add some functions to handle some certain things for when they come back from the server. Okay, so we're going to create 2 functions. Basically, when we make a request for the bullet, the server is going to validate the request, and then it's gonna spawn, and it's gonna tell everybody that needs to spawn this specific object. So we're gonna have a function called on server spawn, and it'll take in some data with e as the parameter. Do that. And then the other one is server unspawn, right? So when our bullet gets destroyed, or maybe there's AI tank when you're playing, whatever, anything gets served by the server. Okay, cool. So we're gonna go back. So when the server says we want to spawn, we don't really have a way to tell the server, hey, to spawn the bullet. A good way to do this is by using what they call a scriptable object. So what we're going to be using is we're going to be using a scriptable object that holds the data for different things the server will spawn. Like I said, it could be an AI tank, it could be a bullet, maybe it's like a flamethrower or a rocket launcher. Anything the server is going to control will go under here if the clients have to spawn it. So we're going to go into code, we're going to create a new folder. We're going to call this scriptable. We're going to go into assets here, right click, create a folder, and we're going to call this one scriptable objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a class for the scriptable object and define how the data is. Then we're going to create the scriptable object, and then we're going to use it inside our class. And the reason why we use the scriptable object is because it allows in memory to only be used once. So if we have server objects as a scriptable object and I throw it on 7 different classes, they all pool from the one same set of memory. So they become very handy for handling chunks of data, and it also makes it a little bit easier to change. I don't have to go through all these game objects. If you have deep hierarchies, I can just go to scriptable objects and I can go change. I can also do things such as create game modes. I can have a game mode scriptable, and inside here I have a bunch of different game modes, and I can swap them in and out at runtime or beforehand and get everything ready for the game. So inside the scriptable code folder, we're going to right click, we're going to make a new class, we're going to call this server objects. Okay, and hopefully that kind of just explains what a scriptable object is. If not, I can do a little bit more in depth on there if people are still having trouble. Basically, just assume that this is going to be a data container, which contains data and objects that are serializable. And using that, I'm able to use in multiple different objects while they all come from the same single source. So if you had a big array of things, this is like one area. So we're going to say project scriptable. We're going to change mono behavior to scriptable object, and it requires an attribute tag, and this attribute tag is to create it in the asset menu. So when you're doing a right click and then you create a folder, this is basically what it's going to call. So the create asset menu requires a file name, and we're going to call this server underscore objects. So when you create the object and it gives you that default name like mono behavior.cs, we're going to call our server objects. You can call it whatever you want, but for this one, we're going to call it server objects. It requires the menu name, and the menu name is going to be scriptable objects / server objects. And what this is, when you right click and you have that crate and then the folder, or I have like C# scripts and then C# script namespace, this is what I'm referring to. I'm saying it's going to be in the scriptable objects folder, and then in there there's going to be something I can click on called server objects. And then we have to give it an order, and I just kind of always use the order 3. It kind of just sits on top, and we're all that good and done. And then make sure you close it out. So if I get rid of this start here, so we need to define what's in our data. So we're going to say public list, and remember it has to be serializable, so you can't use dictionaries or anything to do that. So we're going to say serializable. We're going to say, and we're going to make a class. So we want data. Okay. So what we're going to do is right now our server is going to give us a name. Okay. We're going to say bullet, and our bullet needs to reference the prefab bullet. Okay, so we're going to basically make a little container to kind of make a dictionary. So we are going to go system.serializable, and then I'm going to just remove system dot and bring in the namespace. This is the fast way I find to bring in the namespace for system rather than just typing it. Okay, so we're going to make a public class called server object data. Okay, and this is like what I was saying before. It's going to contain the name and a reference to a game object. So we're going to make a list of those, and we're going to call them objects. Cool. Okay, so inside our thing, we're going to say string name, and then just by default, I'm going to call this new object. You don't have to put this by default. You can just leave it blank if you want. I just sometimes like filling it out. And then it's going to have reference, like I said before, to a game object, and it'll be the prefab it's looking for. So this would be bullet, and then bullet prefab. And inside here, and you don't have to initialize it because it's data. It's gonna initialize it itself. So I'm going to make a function. So scriptable objects can have functions. These are mostly just handy functions for returning the data in certain ways. Maybe you have a big list that has different teams and you want to pull all the ones of a single team. Then you can kind of have a function called, say, get objects of red team or something. And you can make functions like that. So we're going to say that this function is going to return a single object from this list. And we're going to say it's get object by name. So basically we're going to pass this bullet, and in return we should get the prefab. So we're going to say objects dot single or default. And what I'm doing is I'm using link, and link's just a way of searching, and it's fairly optimized. If you guys would like to learn a little bit more on link, there's a variety of tutorials, or like I said myself, I could make my own. But basically we're saying we want the first item that follows what we set as the conditional, and then it's going to return it. If we don't find it, we're going to return default, which would be, since it's a class, it would be null. So we're going to say, so this is going to loop through everything that's in this list. So every item in objects is going to be X. And we're going to say X.name is equal to name. So basically we are grabbing the first guy in our list, the first thing in our list that has the same name as the one we pass in, and we're going to return that back to whoever was asking for it. I'm just going to clean this out. So okay, we're going to hit save. We're going to come back to Unity. Wait for it to compile. And we're going to go into our new folder for scriptable objects. You right click create, and you'll see we have scriptable objects path here and server objects. Okay, and I'm just going to leave that is called server objects for now. And we're going to open up objects. We're going to make one object. We're going to go down to the first element. We're going to call it bullet with a capital B. And we're going to drag the prefab into that slot. Oops, I just dragged my screen off screen. Okay, cool. And you're going to drag the prefab into the slot, and that will save that piece of data. So now if we go to code networking, we need the network client in order to grab reference to the server object. So we're going to go to network client. We're going to scroll up to the top here, and we are going to add reference to the spawnables, okay, to that piece of data, that scriptable object we're looking for. So we're going to say server, we're going to say objects, and it doesn't have reference to it, so make sure you do control period, bring that bad boy in, and we're going to call this server objects. But we already have server objects down below, so I'm actually going to just rename this to server spawnables, just for now. Okay, cool. So now if we scroll down to server spawn, we are going to spawn the object that comes in. We're going to look for it through that list, spawn it, set the data. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to actually just write the little unspawn. The unspawn one is just super quick. So we're going to say string We're going to say ID, and I'm actually just going to take it from up here because we already have it, and there's no need for typing it back out again. Okay, so we're going to grab the ID. We're going to say network identity. We're going to call that NI is equal to server objects at ID. And we're going to say server objects dot remove. So because we haven't added it here, just assume that they're already in the list, right? We're going to say we're going to remove the ID, and then we want to destroy immediately the ni.gameObject. Okay. So like I said, it's very quick, and I just wanted to just put it there. Okay, so when we're spawning something on the server, we're going to want their ID. We're also going to want their name. So what I mean by name is, like I was saying, it's going to come across as bullet with a capital D. So we're going to say that this is the name that we're looking for. And we're going to grab the string value. Okay. So I'm going to scroll up here. I'm going to just grab the positional stuff from up here. Just like I said, there's no need to really type stuff out when you already have it there. We're going to add the X and Y position. Cool. And we're just going to say debug.log format. And we're going to say server wants us to spawn a whatever's inside there. So we're going to say maybe a bullet or maybe an enemy tank. Not too sure. Something that's controlled by the server. Okay, cool. So when we spawn this, we want to do a check. So we want to make sure that server objects does not contain this key, right? We want to make sure that this guy's not already spawned into the game. So we're going to say if he does not contain the key, we're going to say server data object, server object data, my bad. And we're just going to call this SOD, for short. We're going to say server spawnables, and we're going to use that handy function that we made called get object by name, and we're going to pass in the name. So that'll be bullet with a capital B. Beautiful. Okay, so we're going to spawn our object. We're going to say spawn object, and we're going to say instantiate, and we're going to say SOD. So now we have reference to what we have. It'll be bullet and then the prefab site. So we'll say the SOD prefab, and we're going to throw this into the network container like we did our player. Beautiful. And let's set our position. So we'll say transform.position, and this can be equal to a new vector 3. X, Y, and 0, right? So we brought in the X and Y from the data that got passed in. We're going to grab its network identity that's attached to it. We're going to say spawn object dot get component of the network identity. Say ni dot set controller ID to ID. And then we're going to say, we're going to grab the socket reference, and we're just going to pass it like this. So very similar to when we're spawning players, but we're just doing it for objects. And then we're going to add server objects dot add, and we're going to add it the key ID and give it its network identity, right? Adding it to the dictionary. Okay, so this would spawn any object that our server wants to spawn that's in that list. Now, the bullet requires a couple extra things. The bullet requires a direction, right? A rotation in which, if where my mouse is pointing, that's where the bullet has to rotate, and a direction that it has to go in. So we're going to do a simple little check. We're going to say if bullet apply direction as well. So rather than making an extra function, we can kind of just do an if statement. We can say that if the name is equal to bullet, and we can grab a couple extra properties. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this guy, bring those down, and we're going to call this direction X, direction Y. And inside there, you want to make sure that these are changed to direction X and direction Y. And we're going to calculate the rotation. So we're going to say rot, and based on where we are doing the math and the angle that we need, we're going to use the atan function, in particular the atan2 function on this one. And we're going to pass in direction Y and direction X. And then that's going to give us a radian, and we need a degree, right? So our transform is using degrees. So we are going to use a handy little mathf function called rad2degree. And they have the vice versa if you're trying to go back and forth. Cool. So now we're going to say vector3. And we're going to say current rotation. It's equal to a new vector3. And we'll say 0, 0, rod. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a minus 90. And this is kind of like an offset. And the reason why we're doing the offset is, like, again, when we did the barrels and stuff, the way it was facing through my testing, we had to do an offset at 90. And you could store this as a constant. You could store it just as 90 here. It's totally up to you. But no matter what, wherever the angle we get back, it's always 90 from it. Okay, so then we're going to say spawned object dot transform dot rotation is equal to equatorian Euler angles. We're going to say Euler, and then we're going to say current rotation. Okay, so this will grab our bullet and it'll rotate in the direction we're facing, and then we're going to add it to the dictionary of objects. Okay. Let's go back to our planar manager and make sure that we have everything that we need. So we're firing the bullet, and we have it on a cooldown and all that. And if we go back to Unity, we should now see a new space open up for the server objects, and we can drag and drop that guy in there. Beautiful. We'll just check to make sure the bullet has everything it needs. And let's work on some server code. So, if we open up the server, we are going to define a couple new classes. So, the first class we're going to define, we're going to go to new file here. We're going to call this server objects. This is anything that gets spawned on the server. Okay. And this will need, so we're going to say module dot exports, and we're going to call this class. We're going to call this server object. Cool. We'll give it a constructor, and inside there, this is just going to be very similar to the player. We're going to say this dot ID, and we're going to need the short ID there, and then we'll say this dot name, and we'll just give it a default name of server object for now. So this will be bullet, and then this dot position. So basically anything that spawns on the server, and I'm just gonna put vector2, and we're gonna bring in the vector2 class here in a second. Okay, so we need to bring in short ID, so it has reference to something. We're gonna say is require, and we're gonna say short ID. Okay, cool. We're gonna say vector2, and it requires, and we're gonna bring the vector2 class. Beautiful. Okay, so this ID, just like the player, we're gonna say this ID, short ID, and then we're gonna say generate. Okay, so the idea behind this is that we're gonna have a server object. This could be an enemy tank, could be a bullet, like I said, could be anything. And this is gonna be the base class and the base properties that they always have. They always have a name, an ID, and a position. And just like our network client here, where we apply a direction, we're going to do a very similar technique. So we're going to make a new class, and we're going to call this bullet.json. And we're going to inherit, just like you would in C# or any other language, you're going to inherit from the server object class. So we're going to say variable, we're going to say server object, and we're going to say this requires server object.js. Beautiful. And we're going to need the vector2 class as well. Just like before, we'll do slash and vector2.js. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's write the class. We're going to say module exports, and it's going to be a class. And then just like C#, we can say rather than a colon and then who we inherit from, they use the keyword in Node.js extends, and then we'll say it extends server object, and this matches this, right? Which matches this. Okay, so And then we're going to put the curly braces, and we're going to say constructor. And if you do any JavaScript or those type of languages, when you call the constructor for server object, use the keyword super. So we're going to say super, and it's always the first one you call. And so we're going to add, just like we were saying, we're going to say we need a direction. We're going to say new vector 2. And then the bullet as well is going to need a speed, right, to propel itself. And just from testing, you're able to change this, but from testing, I use 0.5. And then the last thing we're going to do is I like to allow objects, so the bullet, or like I said, an AI tank, the ability to kind of handle what it does inside its own class. So we're going to have an onUpdate that gets called. And what it's going to do is it's going to, in the future, it's going to return true or false, basically, if it's been destroyed. And for now, for this tutorial, we're just going to return false. Basically, we're going to keep shooting, and they're going to keep spawning bullets. And then when we do the collision in the next tutorial, we'll handle this and delete it, along with some helpers in Unity. So we're going to say this dot position dot x is plus equal to this dot direction dot x. Okay, so right, if you were sitting where my mouse is right now, and the tank was aiming this way, when we add the position, we're going to add it this way. And then we're going to also times it by speed so it looks more natural and goes the speed that we want, right? So this is going to be like a normalized style direction. This is going to be like, I want to go this way, and it's an increment that I want to go this way, okay? From 0 and 1 on X and Y. And then we times it by speed in order to get it to go how fast we want. Okay, so that's X. And we're going to do Y. So when you spawn the bullet, it's going to come into this update, and it's going to return false now, so it's just always going to stay alive, and it's going to handle position X and positional Y going in the direction that it was spawned in. Cool. Let's go back to index. So in index, we're going to write a utility function called setInterval. And what this does is it allows a function to be called every so many milliseconds. And then you can call other functions. You can write a function inside of it. But it allows you to define different increments of time for something to be called. So where currently we've been waiting on events, and then we handle events accordingly, this will allow things to run by itself. So in this case, we're going to be updating the bullets every 100 milliseconds. So just at the bottom here, I like to keep this out of the way. We're going to say function interval. Okay. And the interval function is going to take a func, a wait, and how many times. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to say variable interv for interval. And we're going to say that's a function of wait time. And what we're going to do is we're going to return a function. And normally this is something I just like, it's just written once. And you can find this on a variety of sites for how people do this sort of stuff. And we're going to say, we're going to put a semicolon there. And we're going to say if type of t, and then 3 equals to check to see if it's undefined. Or t minus minus, so t minus 1 is greater than 0. Then we're going to do a set timeout. We're going to say, we're going to call this again with how long we're going to be calling it. And then we're going to try, we're going to do a try catch here. And we're going to do func.call null. If not, we are going to catch it, and it will take parameter e. There we go. We're going to say t is equal to 0. And then we're just going to throw e dot to string. Here, there we go. We're just going to throw the e to string. Okay, and then what we need to do is at the bottom of the function return, we're going to say wait, and then how many times. Beautiful. And then set timeout to intervals and wait. So if you wanted to, you could run the function 5 times. Every second for 5 times, call this function, right? We're going to be using it every 100 milliseconds for like the end of time. But if you wanted to set something up that only ran for 5 seconds and you wanted to update every 100 milliseconds, then you could do that as well. Okay, so that's at the bottom. We kind of just leave it off there. What we're going to do is we're going to scroll up near the top here. And we're going to create a spot for the bullets. So we're going to say bullets, new array. And underneath that, we're just going to call a little thing called updates. And we're going to say set interval. Beautiful. And set interval is going to take in an arrow function, and we're going to define that in a second. And what it does need is, if we hit comma, it's going to look for how many signs. So this is in milliseconds, like I was saying, so every 100 milliseconds. And then 0, so it's just going to infinitely repeat for how many times. Cool. So we're just going to leave that now, and then we're going to update the bullet in a second. What we're going to do is we're going to create the bullet spawning, the bullet firing. So just above disconnect here, I'm going to say socket.on, and we made a function, right? It was called fire bullet, and it's going to pass us some data. There we go. If I could type inside the brackets, then we would be golden. Okay, cool. Okay, so what we're going to do is we need to bring in the bullet class up here. So we're going to just scroll up by player here. We're going to say bullet, and then we're going to say require, and we're going to go into the classes folder and then into bullet.js. Beautiful. Okay. All right, so when we hit fire, let's say we're going to create a new bullet. Let's equal to a new bullet, right? So when we call this guy, it's going to come into here. It's going to say super. Okay, so now I'm going to create this object. It's going to generate the ID, the name, and the position, then come back and make direction speed for us. So we'll have like 5 or 6 variables. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to assign just the properties that we've gotten from data. So we're going to say bullet.name is equal to bullet with capital B, right? Make sure we keep that consistent. We're going to say bullet.position.x is equal to data.position.x. And I'm going to be very lazy. I'm going to copy this line, and because we have to do the Y and the directional, I'm going to paste it so there's 4 of them. I'm going to go back through here, and every other just do Y. So I'll say X, Y, X, Y, and then change these guys to direction. And make sure you change all the instances for the data as well as the bullet. If you want to just type it out or copy it, your choice. Okay, so after we made the bullet, we can say bullets.push in the bullet. So that'll push it into the array so we have reference to it. Okay, so we are going to make a variable called return data. What this is just our optimized packet that we're going to send back to the client. So it requires, if you went back to network identity, when you spawn, we need a name, an ID, position, and because we're sending bullet, we need directional values as well. Okay, so name is going to be bullet.name, comma, ID, and this is going to be bullet.id. Then we're going to say position, and that's going to be a different object. We're going to say X. We're going to say bullet.position.x. Y, same thing. Make sure we do a comma. We're going to say direction. And this is the same thing. This requires X and Y. And we're going to say bullet.direction.x. Same thing for Y. Beautiful. Okay, so we've created the object, and now we're going to emit. So because we're internally, we're going to say socket.emit. So we're going to send it to our player, and we're going to say server spawn, and then we're just going to pass it the return data. Beautiful. Now if you copy this, so this is going to go to our guy, and we got to send it to everybody else. So let's make this a broadcast, right? As I was explaining broadcasts in previous tutorials, broadcast goes to everybody but yourself. So that's why we have to send it to ourselves as well as everybody else. Okay. Now let's go to this update function. Okay, so we're going to use for each. So we're going to say bullets dot for each. And then inside here, we're going to say, so we're going to call the variable just bullet. And then it's going to be an arrow function. And then we are going to call the update, right? And like I was saying on the update, it's going to return false for now, but in the future it'll be false or true based on if it is destroyed. So there we go. We're going to say is destroyed, and we're going to say bullet dot on update. So this will call every 100 milliseconds. It'll update the bullet, which will update its position and directional based on the speed. Okay, it'll return to us if this is destroyed. So if it's destroyed, we're going to say if is destroyed, then we are going to destroy the bullet. So we're going to grab variable index is equal to bullets dot index of bullet. Right, so this will return us where in the array we are, and we're going to say if the index is greater than -1. So what it does, if it's not in there, it'll return -1. We're going to say bullets.splice, so this will remove it from the array. We're going to say we're going to remove it at this index, and we're going to remove one item. So if you had an array or something and you wanted to go to the 5th element, and from there just destroy everything else, or destroy 5 elements after that, then you could. That's what the end number is for. You could determine that. We're gonna send some data back to the player because the bullet's now been destroyed, so we have to despawn it. If you go to network client, our unspawning requires an ID, so we're gonna say bullet.id. And then we have to kind of loop over each player and send it to them, okay? You could grab one player and then do the emit and then broadcast as well, or you could just kind of loop over each player. It's really up to you. Okay, and this is a dictionary the players are in, so it's going to return you the keys, which are the player IDs, and then those are also matching the sockets. So that's why outside the connection here, where we don't have a reference to socket anymore, we can still find who we're kind of talking to because we're just talking to everybody. So sockets at player ID dot emit server lowercase unspawn, and we'll do return data. Beautiful. Okay, so that's if it's destroyed. In this tutorial, you probably won't run through this chunk of code because it always returns false. So let's update, shall we? Okay, so if it is updating, we are going to use, like I was saying in the tutorial before, the reason why we had the other function update rotation is because we can have other objects, such as the bullet, take advantage of updating its position. So we can pass its ID and position, and then we already have that function set up in order to do that. So we need ID and position. Say position. This is an object X, and we'll say bullet.position.x, and same thing for the Y. Beautiful. And then we're going to go outside, return data here, and we're going to say, we're actually just going to copy this just because it's much faster. We're going to go through all the players again, and instead of server unspawning, we are going to say update position. Beautiful. Okay, so we've done a total lot of stuff. Let's try this guy out. So you can use your node mod, or you can use npm start. If you run into an issue, if you're trying to use npm start here, make sure you go into your package.json and change under scripts to start node index.js. So this is, we're using the command node, and then the first script we want to open is index.js. So if you ever run into an issue with that, make sure you go check the package.json file. Okay, so our server has started, and we're going to come back into the game, and we're going to hit play. Okay, so like before, we can rotate, and if we click, we're gonna get an error, and our first error. Okay, so our first error is that we never assigned the bullet spawn point. So we're gonna stop here. We're gonna go into, we can just kind of open it. We'll drag this back in here. We'll go to player prefab, and we're gonna drag in bullet spawn point, and then hit apply. Delete that and save the scene. Okay. That was pretty good, one error. Okay, so we are shooting. Okay. And we ran into some errors. So the first error that I ran into was, it says bullet.push. So when we're creating the bullet, I said bullet.push, and our bullet array is actually bullets. So we are gonna start that back up again. And if you have NodeMon, you can just save and it'll restart. I was just having some issues with NodeMon, so I've went back to the old method here. Make sure your game is actually turned off. Okay, we'll start this guy back up, and we'll fire. And yay, everything's working. Okay, so our bullet, based on where we clicked, will rotate itself, right? And then it will update itself on here. And if I actually just kind of hit pause here, and I click on any one of these bullets, you'll be able to see that it's kind of like way off into the distance from our player, right? So they're kind of updating and doing all that jazz. And all right, so that's me standing still. And if you move around, you'll notice because our barrel position moves with our tank, we always have the spot where we're shooting from. Okay. And they're just gonna kind of keep piling up. And next episode, when we do collision, we'll be able to despawn these bullets. So we already have where we're going to despawn. We've already written the code. We just have to now check for collisions, or basically if it's left the game, or if it's hit somebody, and then we destroy it and apply damage and do all that. Just wanted to make sure I give a nice shout out to the people over on Patreon that help me support and help me do Twitch and YouTube tutorials. So thank you, and you guys will be in the following list. Jaron Frost. Hey everyone, if you guys liked the video, make sure you guys click that subscribe button, give it a like, and make sure to comment. It really helps out. And if you guys are looking to support the project further, I also have my Patreon, which will be linked in the description down below. Thank you, and have a good day.